Before Rome, before Egypt, before Greece, before even the Bible, there was Mesopotamia. Somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, there existed a place where humans first coalesced into society, where we learned to farm, where we made the first cities, where we created the first great works of art. This is the cradle of civilization, and here the first flowers of humanity blossomed into what we are today. Here is the story of the Sumerians. If you were to take everything that you know about ancient civilizations and start a timeline, then go back until you run out of things to put on it, then go back another 5,000 years, you'd be in Sumer. We don't have much in terms of written records from this time period. So historians have had to piece together stories from the archaeological record. What they've found is so fascinating that many scholars believe these people were an alien race who came down from the heavens to teach primitive humans how to become civilized. But let's rewind the clock and find out what happened. The Sumerian civilization emerged at the end of the Neolithic era in Mesopotamia around 5000 BC. This was a region in the Middle East that eventually became known as the Fertile Crescent. It's called this because its proximity to the rivers allowed farmers to irrigate crops, creating a region which would see some of the first permanent settlements in history. These early settlements were probably led by a chieftain who would oversee farming efforts and assign tasks to people in the community. The chieftainship was most likely a hereditary title passed down from father to son. Because of this, when one of them died, their body would be buried in a special mound, giving rise to something called a burial mound culture. If you look at ancient maps of Mesopotamia, you will see the region littered with dozens of these burial mounds. Some of the earliest ones date back to the reign of the Sumerians. As time went on, the communities grew larger, becoming a sort of city-state. The Sumerian city-states would form alliances with each other to better protect themselves against invaders. For example, the Sumerian city of Lagash formed an alliance with another city called Umma in order to control access to the sea. During this time period, trading goods became very important to Sumer, and the alliance gave them access to vital resources like copper. A lot of the cities were named after the leaders who founded them. As such, when a chieftain died, his successor might change the city's name to reflect his own identity. Over time, this caused a ton of confusion, and eventually the names of places got attached to the locations permanently instead of the leader's name. The Sumerian civilization was home to multiple city-states, but by far the greatest was Ur. Ur would eventually become the center of the Sumerian world. There would be temples dedicated to their gods built within the city. Eventually, these temples would grow to be gigantic, and they would become known as ziggurats. The ziggurat of Ur is believed to have been built 2,000 years before the Tower of Babel, and it may have inspired the story in the Bible. The Sumerians built their ziggurat to reach the gods in the heavens, consisting of 7 stages representing each hour of the day. The interior of the temple would feature various shrines and chambers, some containing the gods and others housing priests who would tend to the temple. The top floor would contain the holiest shrine of all, containing a statue of the patron deity of the city. Priests would climb to the top of the ziggurat every morning to greet the sun and communicate with the gods. As far as we can tell, the ziggurat was the largest building in any Sumerian city, so it would have been visible from miles away. To those approaching the city, it was a symbol of divine power. One of the most important things to understand about Sumer is that unlike later Mesopotamian empires, the Sumerians didn't conquer neighboring city-states, preferring instead to stay in their own lane and mind their own business. Part of the reason for this was that they were pacifists, believing war to be a barbaric way of settling disputes. Another part of the reason was simply logistics. At this point in human history, no army was capable of dominating the region. Even if they were, the terrain was largely impassable during certain times of the year. Rivers would flood and turn the land into a muddy mess. And if you think fighting in Iraq is bad now, imagine trying to move an army across the country while riding a horse. Not easy. While the Sumerians did not dominate other city-states through violence, They did engage in something called cultural diffusion, meaning that they spread their culture to nearby regions without conquering them. You see, Sumer was situated between two regions that were filled with nomadic tribes, the Zagros Mountains to the east and the Arabian Desert to the south. Over time, the Sumerians would interact with these tribes, exposing them to ideas like agriculture. In turn, the nomads would expose the Sumerians to new technology and ideas from the wider world. Now we come to one of the most shocking inventions in human history. Around 3200 BC, somebody in Sumer sat down with a reed stick and pressed it into wet clay. That moment would change the world forever, because it marked the invention of cuneiform, the world's first writing system. We don't know who invented cuneiform or why, but we do know that it started in Sumer. Cuneiform is derived from the Latin word for wedge-shaped, referring to the wedge shape that the marks would leave in the clay tablets. Initially, cuneiform was used as a method to keep track of inventory for temples, but it eventually developed into a full writing system that could write anything. Unlike other writing systems at the time, which only wrote numbers, cuneiform could write entire words. And even better, it could write abstract concepts like justice or hope. With the invention of writing, the Sumerians were able to document religious texts, legal precedents, and historical accounts. We have them to thank for our modern concept of a book. And without them, we wouldn't have any of the stories from Gilgamesh, one of the oldest pieces of literature in history. Around 2900 BC, the Sumerian language began to be replaced by the Akkadian language, and the empire would eventually fall to outside invaders. But the legacy of Sumer lives on in the DNA of every future civilization that came after it. Many of the gods that would appear in later Mesopotamian religions would first be found in Sumerian mythology. Some of these include Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and Utu, the sun god. The Sumerians also gave us the first laws in human history, though it should be noted that law at the time was more of a collection of customs than an organized legal code. Sumer was also the birthplace of organized government, featuring the world's first bureaucrats. The Sumerians would also give us the first astronomers, who carefully recorded the positions of the stars and planets. They would also give us the first poets, musicians, and artists. The Sumerians helped invent the plow, the wheel, and the sailboat, all technologies that would shape the future of mankind. And even though they had no universities per se, they would give us the world's first school, a place where children could go to learn how to read, write, and perform complex calculations. Now that we've seen how Sumer influenced the world, let's take a look at how it ended. We know that Sumer fell because new groups of people moved into the region, but we don't know exactly who these people were or why they migrated to Sumer. The most popular theory is that the people were fleeing a natural disaster further east in Iran. Whatever the reason, these people were called the Elamites, and they would eventually conquer Sumer. This event is known as the Elamo-Sumerian period. One of the biggest differences between the Elamites and Sumerians was religion. The Elamites practiced a more polytheistic religion, whereas the Sumerians believed in a pantheon of gods. They believed that their gods lived among the clouds and would influence human activity. To appease these gods, they built giant temples and engaged in elaborate rituals. When the Sumerians fell, their gods did too. However, some of their gods would live on in Babylonian and Assyrian myths. Today, there are roughly 6 million native speakers of Sumerian, and most of them live in Israel. Sumerian is considered a dead language, however, because it's no longer used for everyday communication. Although it's dead, it still has a major impact on the world. When the Sumerians pressed a reed into clay tablets thousands of years ago, they opened the door to human progress. They proved that people could not only live in harmony with nature, but they could make great works of art and literature, and they could build monuments to rival the gods. But perhaps the most important thing that the Sumerians gave us was hope. Hope that humans could become civilized. Hope that we could work together to build a better future. Hope that one day we would reach the stars. There is a quote from the Epic of Gilgamesh that reads, "Do not despise the shortness of your life. Let the thought of death, which is your term, not dismay you. What is the purpose of a man alive? To lie beneath the stones of a tomb. All that men do must be done by the will of fate. When a man is born, he makes ready for death." This may sound morbid, but if you think about it, it's actually quite freeing. We shouldn't waste our lives worrying about what could go wrong. Instead, we should focus on making the most of what we have and appreciating the gift of life. Thank you for watching and subscribing to the channel.